thrilled to be here. Welcome to the Wood Deferred Center. We're on the stage of the Alliance Theater. My colleague Susan Booth, fantastic artistic director here, will be talking to you after lunch, I believe. So I have the pleasure of welcoming you on behalf of my colleagues. Michael Shapiro runs the High Museum, Stanley Rovenstein from the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, and Robert Spahn, the musical director, Sharice Williams with Young Audiences, and Susan is here, and we're on your beautiful stage, so thank you for having us. This is a special treat for me because I'm double dipping. In my life, I'm always looking for double or triple dipping, and this is one of those great experiences. I had the privilege of serving on the Community Foundation board. I also chaired the Arts Fund Advisory Board, so I'm really steeped in the great organization that the Community Foundation is. I learned a lot. I continue to learn a lot. Thank you, Alicia, for having me. And I personally have a planned gift. My husband and I have a planned gift of the Community Foundation, which I had years ago. This is not a recent decision. Before all my colleagues asked me for planned gifts, but that's okay too. That's really important, and I really can't name an organization that I think is has potentially greater impact and is such a great learning organization, and that's than the Community Foundation. So thank you for my personal benefit of that. It's much more important to hear about this and about what we do here, and I'm going to introduce my friend Suzanne Boaz, who's the chair of the board. Thank you for very much for being here.
Well, thanks to you, Virginia, for hosting this event. It's really an interesting venue, isn't it? I thought it was really a perfect venue for a family gathering, and I was thinking that you really are family to me because, like me, you're members of the Legacy Society, and that's what we're here to celebrate today and to thank you for your involvement with the Community Foundation. Legacy for me is a really interesting word, and I don't know what it conjures up for you when you hear that word, if you think of one individual or maybe a couple of individuals, but for me, it is definitely my paternal grandmother and my parents. And the reason that I say that I link them with the word legacy is because they had such a profound impact on my life by the way that they lived their lives. I think about the things that they cared about and the values that they tried to instill in me, and that has really been a legacy for me. My family has had a closely held family business for 5 generations, and I think I'm the only one that didn't go into that business and didn't stay there. And my grandmother and my mother and father really modeled a lot of things for me. They modeled hard work. They modeled always living well within your means. They modeled planning for the future. They modeled the importance of family. And they modeled taking really good care of your employees and also taking care of the people in the community who, through no fault of their own, really needed a hand up or a little help. They were truly generous people in every sense of the word, and I know my husband, who's been here and knew them intimately, would agree with that. Well, my parents died about, 9 years ago now? 9 years ago. And they left us significant assets at that time. When we think back on what it was that they really left us, it was how they modeled for us how to live a generous life. Their legacy was really the values that they left us and that they left our children. When our children were born, like all parents, we were concerned about providing for them. And I think that's understandable. We wanted to make sure that there were, that we had amassed enough assets and that we had invested properly so that if we died before they came of age, that there'd be money there to take care of educating them and caring for them, and that if they had some serious illness or a horrible accident, that they'd be covered. And we've had the same financial advisor for 22 years. I see Ed here, but there are lots of people out there in the financial arena, and there are lots to choose from, but we've had the same person for 22 years. And always, no matter what we were meeting with our planner to talk about, whether it was some new life insurance thing or an investment change or whatever, he always ended up asking us exactly the same question sometime during that meeting. And that question was, how much do you want to leave your children? And, from an estate planning standpoint, that's a basic question. And he would ask that to us, and it was a pretty easy question to answer when their children were little because, as I told you, we were concerned about taking care of them in the event that we were not there to take care of them. But our children are grown now. They've finished their higher education. They're established in their professions. They're very independent. They're doing very well. And Rob and I realized that that really isn't the question for us anymore. The question is not how much do we want to leave them, but what do we want to leave them, and what is the legacy that we want to leave to our children. Rob and I decided to open a donor-advised fund at the community at the Community Foundation, in part to underscore the importance of generosity, importance that we believe in generosity, and to underscore that for our children. While they're both giving to their communities through the professions that they've chosen and the communities that they live in, we wanted to make sure that they took time out of their busy lives, and they are very busy now. They're in their early 30s and they are very busy. But we wanted to make sure that they took time out of their busy lives to concentrate on giving back and being generous and helping others. And as a result, we named both of them as successor trustees to our donor-advised funds. And this year, beginning this year, we're going to get them here on the same day and have a family meeting and start to have them being involved with us and making decisions about the grants from our fund. We chose to work with the Community Foundation because of the staff's professionalism, because of their accessibility, and because of their really intimate knowledge of the needs in this community, and also the strength of the organizations in this community that serve people in need. We also thought that the staff could relate well to our children as they grew and matured. My husband and I hope that we're going to have many years working together with our children to make joint decisions about the grants that are going to come from our donor-advised fund. But at the end of the day, when our planned gift with the Community Foundation is realized and a portion of our estate is added to the donor-advised fund, we are even more hopeful that our children will appreciate the legacy of generosity and caring for others that we're trying to leave behind. We also hope that the gifts that they make from our fund after our deaths will continue to be focused on the issues that have been important to us as a family and that we've cared about and talked about together. We have a great program planned for you today, but right now, if you will enjoy your lunch, which, as I understand from Alicia, is provided by Affairs to Remember, we'll resume our program in about 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
I'm so delighted to see so many of you here today. It's nice to have the Legacy Society members back together again. And as Suzanne said, legacy means different things to different people. And it really is also at different times in your life, legacy means different things. And the technical definition, of course, is leaving something by will or bequest, personal possessions or money. But it's also leaving those feelings and the memories and the things that are so important to you and your family. And that's what Suzanne was touching on. Those things that are so intrinsic to who you are as a person come from somewhere often. And so what we always are trying to explore with people that are associated with the Community Foundation is, what do you want to instill in the next generation? What do you hope that next generation learns from you? And how can we keep that going for generations to come? And another question, though, is not only just sort of looking at it personally, but also looking at it as a community. What do we want this community to be like in future generations? I know for Virginia, it would be a community with lots of arts, and it would be for Susan, too. And so all of us have a different sort of feeling about what we'd want that community to look like as it was. And the Community Foundation holds itself out as a philanthropic steward of the community. of serving this 23 county area that goes as north as Pickens, south as Butts, east is Morgan, and west is Carroll. So think about it, it's a pretty big geographic area. But we currently manage about $900 million in assets, which is a record high for the Community Foundation. And as all of you know, our mission is to strengthen our region by providing quality services to donors and innovative leadership on community issues. And the 4 goals that get us to that are engaging donors, strengthening nonprofits, advancing public will, and practicing organizational excellence. And 2013 was a record-breaking year for the Community Foundation. We received $197 million in new money into the Community Foundation, which was like, pinch me, like, am I really still alive? I mean, is that true? It was just an amazing, amazing moment. And obviously, the largest amount of money ever coming into the Community Foundation in its 63-year history. And we paid out in grants, which is what really matters, $121 million in grants. 5,500 grants were made in 2013. One of the largest years ever for the grant making. And 92% of that 121 million came from donors with donor advised funds, just like you. So it's really important to note that. And so when we talk about all those numbers, it seems like so much of everything is focused on the here and the now. We've got donor advised fund grant making, competitive grant making, and we're doing regional research, and we're doing organizational partnerships. But ultimately, the Community Foundation is really committed to the long-term health of this region. And we really look at it from your children, your children's children, those children, it's infinity. That's what we're really trying to make sure that there's a strong community for. And so how do we all embrace that and help make that happen so that the community is stronger in the future? Some of it is the gifts that you are giving, but some of it is there are some donors who've chosen to look at it more broadly around issue areas. As you know, the Community Foundation has been vitally involved in things like the Neighborhood Fund, the Metropolitan Atlanta Arts Fund that Virginia chaired, our Atlanta AIDS Fund, Grants to Green that looks at sustainability of nonprofits. And some donors have chosen to do legacy gifts to help those issue areas continue to be able to respond to the changing needs of the community. Or they've selected issue areas that really matter to them, like literacy. We have one donor who really wants to make a difference around literacy. But there also are some donors, thank goodness, who have been very passionate about knowing that this community continues to change. And they have left their gifts for our Common Good Fund so that it allows the Community Foundation ad infinitum into the future. I always wanted to do that, Susan. I wanted to pretend that I was like on the stage. I know, I had to figure out some way to sort of pretend I was on the stage for a moment. All the way out in the future, it provides for that unrestricted giving and that flexibility that's so important for a community to have to be able to respond to changing needs. I mean, I remember when we were able to make a grant in 1981 for what was gay-related immune deficiency at that time, before it was even named AIDS. And by having that flexible money, we were able to respond to something that no one ever knew was going to be, but it was there to be able to look ahead. So I thank you for all that you do and all that you have done for the Community Foundation. We're so honored to be your partner in philanthropy. And thank you for the faith and trust that you've shown in the Community Foundation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the wonderful Susan Booth, Artistic Director of the Tony Award-winning Alliance Theater. And as Virginia stated, arts are important to the Community Foundation, so we're very delighted to have Susan to talk to us about why arts are important to our whole region. And I know that after her talk, you're going to really enjoy the tours, because finally I'll get to see backstage. But Susan came to Atlanta from Chicago 13 years ago, and during her time, she's initiated the Collision Project for Teens, the Alliance Candida National Graduate Playwriting Competition. She's created local producing partnerships, and she's overseen some major regional productions. Also, she has really overseen some major commercial partnerships, Ghost Brothers of Darkling County, The Color Purple, Bring It On the musical. She's directed productions of some of the country's finest theaters while she's gone on tour. She was the board president for the Theater Communications Group, which is the key group of theater leaders in the country, and she serves as adjunct faculty at Emory. Susan, welcome to your own stage.
So, thinking about legacy, I have to take a selfish moment. The two people that no one tell my mother this. The two people that really brought me up were my father, Scott Booth, and my grandmother, Rose Bowman. And what I learned from my father, Scott Booth, who was a banker and a lawyer, was truly there is no gray. There is right, there is wrong, and you know. There is no gray. It was interesting to grow up with. But from my grandmother Rose Bowman, a direct descendant of Davy Crockett, as she would tell you very quickly, I learned the power of other people's stories. Grandma Rose and I, in her big old Cadillac, would drive around Youngstown, Ohio. And at intersections, she would see somebody and she would start making up a song about that person. They were fantastic little songs. They sometimes devolved down to our personal family favorite, which was in a parking lot once when she sang, "Little girl in blue, I'm gonna hit you."
She sounds like a wonderful one.
She was a pistol. But I very much owe them my belief in the clarity of right and wrong and my passion about human stories. So I was thinking a little bit about what I wanted to talk about, and I will often write a title before I know what I'm going to talk about. And what I wrote down was Truth, Beauty, and Defriending on Facebook. We'll see where that goes. So in settings like this, when we gather to discuss the I don't quite know how to define it, but I know it when I see it concept, which is art, which is also, interestingly, the Supreme Court's definition of obscenity. We often do this arm's length thing with our chosen topic, art. Instead of talking about it as a catalyst for or causal of, as an essential part of a larger equation, we instead think of it as precious. We think of it as an ornamental trophy for the haves, as a kind of noblesse oblige handout to the have-nots, and I wonder how this happened. Art is the language of compassion. It is the capacity to wonder, it is the estimation of beauty, but maybe that's too ephemeral to translate into a conversation about truly essential matters. Maybe it's too squishy to be thought of as a civic priority when we have so many other things pressing on our limited bandwidth of resources and time and attention. So we'll simplify and strengthen. Art does not merely articulate compassion, it is compassion. It doesn't just teach us to wonder, it is wonder. And don't ever underestimate beauty as a fragile thing. According to the Greeks, it launched 1,000 ships. And I think about the Greeks. I'm a big fan of 6th century BC Athens, because the same people at the same time, at the same place, came up with theater and democracy. This was a pretty active think tank. Athenian democracy was direct participatory democracy, right? They didn't elect officials to go pass bills for them. They showed up. The entire community, regardless of class, gender was still an issue, but that's a separate lecture. But the entire community, regardless of class, showed up to debate the future of their society. And they listened to multiple truths. They spoke multiple truths. And then they decided where they aligned. And that's what they supported. At the same time, they were evolving what we know today as Western theater. And this is, I promise, quick and dirty, a primer on the evolution of theater. It's going to be over in about a minute and a half, so don't panic. So once upon a time, you have one actor who intones to a group of listeners, right? And the great thing about the Greeks is that not only did they attend theater on a regular basis, theater that would go on for hours at a time, they paid for the privilege. which I think is a large reason why the Romans flamed out and the Greeks endured. But here, back to the evolution of theater, along came a guy named Aeschylus who had this crazy idea. Rather than one actor sort of monotheistically intoning, let's put another actor on the stage. Let's have a protagonist and an antagonist and let something dramatic happen between them. Well, that did more than just double the cost of the production. That was a big fat paradigm shift, because as soon as you had two people standing there, just like democracy, you had multiple truths. And you as an audience had to make a choice. Next came Sophocles, then came Euripides, and a really cool other thing happened, few more actors, but the chorus became part of the theatrical event. And the chorus was essentially the audience's representative on stage. And it would be a group of people who would say, Medea, you probably shouldn't do that with the children. They would voice what the audience was thinking, which gave you in the audience permission to recognize that you coincided with some truths and you disagreed with others. Congratulations, by the way, you are now done with the history and the evolution of theater. You can get an entire college credit for that. So we've subsequently added some more bells and whistles to the form, musical numbers, helicopters landing on stage. But the basic premise of theater remains the same as it did with the ancient Greeks. Multiple truths, and an audience that we ask to lean in, to listen, and to align themselves empathetically with one of the truths that they hear. And why might that practice be something that I'd have the audacity to think of as essential? Why would the practice of empathy be something that I would think, how often am I going to have your attention, this group of people, and I'm going to use it talking about empathy? Here's why. Our last chair of the National Endowment of the Arts had a phrase that he loved. Art works. Art works on you, and art works for you. Because the direct participation in an empathetic moment where you imagine somebody else's truth leads to psychic shift, lasting, permanent psychic shift. My dad was a big Oliver Wendell Holmes fan. Big Oliver Wendell Holmes fan. This was a quote that we grew up on. The mind, once expanded to the dimensions of a new idea, can never retract to its original size. So imagine for a second a city where public discourse was based on those same Athenian tenets of democracy and theater, right? The capacity to live with multiple truths and align yourself with them. That city would lean in and listen. That city would have a town square where dialogue would displace rhetoric, where empathy would displace rush to judgment, and where, because of our capacity to sit with multiple truths, we'd be comfortable with lives and beliefs and tenets other than our own. Imagine that city where we talk with, not just about, the other, because we knew how. Here's the thing, we always knew how. We had that capacity from the time we were brought into the world. I have a side fixation. Theater by day, psychotherapy by night. I am fascinated, completely armchair avocationally, by the workings of the brain. How is it that we cry when somebody else is hurting? How does that happen? How is it that we experience terror sitting in a movie theater while that young woman walks down that dark hallway that she shouldn't walk down? We know intellectually it's not happening to us, and yet the tears fall, we shiver, we become afraid. How does that happen? Well, the source of empathetic reactions is a collection of brain cells called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons speak to us from the perspective of the other, and they cause our brains to react as if we were suffering the same fate as actors on a stage or people around us. There's a UCLA behavioral scientist, a guy named Marco Iacoboni. He's a brilliant writer and a very digestible writer about mirror neurons. He calls them the tiny miracles that get us through our day. They're at the heart of how we navigate through our lives. They bind us with each other mentally and emotionally. The ability to empathize, to put ourselves in another's place is essential to the human ability to bond and to ensure the survival of our species. We enter the world with that capacity hardwired. So, what happened? Why do we struggle as grown folks with empathy? Jacobani's been studying not only the evolution of mirror neurons, but their devolution as well. And he and his cohorts have pointed out that we now have an entire adult generation who have received more input from single-dimensional screens than they have from three-dimensional people. And as a result, their mirror neurons, in the same way that if you don't use your muscles, they can atrophy, that single-dimensional input is not calling on their mirror neurons. They literally, physically, have diminished capacity for empathy because their input comes from a screen as opposed to people. People, actors. There's this other element. This is the defriending part of it. We live in the Internet of Everything, right? The ultimate connector. But the Internet of Everything also provides us with an amazing set of technologies, easy to use technologies, that allow us to completely individuate, curate, if you will, all input. We decide. So, Republican, got a newspaper for you. Democrat, got a cable news network for you. Liberal, got a blog for you. On Facebook, there is a tool called defriending. You hit a button. Just put your finger on the screen for a little while until the picture dances around, and you can defriend somebody. Why do we do this? Maybe it's because of all the cat videos. But typically, why we defriend people is because we start to hear ideas and rhetoric and political positions so divergent from our own that we want to be absent them. And we have a technology that allows us to do that. We're different, your views are different than mine. I would rather not subject myself to them. So, empathy erodes. What could interrupt that? What could return us to that connected, compassionate state that our mirror neurons provide for us when we first enter the world? I was going to talk about art. Here's a little sidebar. That's not really a sidebar, because I am going to talk about art. The National Endowment for the Arts recently published a study called Arts and Achievement in At-Risk Youth. It was a series of 4 longitudinal studies. The NEA partnered with the Federal Department of Education, and they tracked teenagers and young adults who were in the lowest quarter of social economic status, so we're talking about the kids without safety nets. And they tracked high arts immersion kids and low arts immersion kids. Their definition of high arts immersion, were they audience members at concerts? Were they in band? Were they in drama club? So high arts kids and low arts kids. And here's some of their findings. Youth with high arts immersion, better academic outcomes, higher career goals, more civically engaged than their low arts peers. Teenagers and young adults with low socioeconomic status who have a history of arts involvement earn better grades, have higher rates of college enrollment and attainment than their low arts immersion peers. 74% of 8th grade students with high arts engagement plan to earn a bachelor's degree, as opposed to 40% who have low arts. And how does that work out? Teenagers with high arts involvement, 3 times more likely to earn a bachelor's degree than their low art peers. But these are the stats that I think should matter and that address that empathy erosion concern. Young adults who've had intensive arts experiences are far more likely to show civic-minded behavior than young adults who did not. Young adults with high arts immersion show high levels of volunteering, voting, and engagement. There's a study called Champions of Change that UCLA did a number of years ago. They were looking to find out what effect arts experience had on standardized test scores. They found fantastic corollaries, but they found something else that they weren't looking for, which I love, which is that kids who are immersed in the arts are 40% more likely to have friends whose cultural and socioeconomic background is different than their own than kids who aren't immersed in the arts. 40% more likely. So these arts immersed young people show up, they volunteer, they vote. And we value this, right? Committed volunteers. We want the next generation, speaking of legacy, of Atlantans to look like this. Any city would. Every city does. But Atlanta has something in its DNA, I have learned in my 13 years, that is different. We take very seriously Dr. King's dictate of the beloved community. Another quote I have up next to Oliver Wendell Holmes. Our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require qualitative change in our souls and quantitative change in our lives. There's a man who sits in front of the MARTA Art Center station. And I talk about him whenever I can because I want everyone to know his story. He's an older man. He wears a crown and a cape. And he sits on a stone bench, and he's usually there in the evenings. And I often leave the theater late at night, and it's as if a lighting designer came and painted this picture because he sits in this perfect halo of light. And if you get close, you realize this is not a paper crown. That this crown has weight. And this is not some threadbare piece of fabric. This is a cape that might have been fur once upon a time. And this man sits there. And we drive by, and we walk by, and we train by. And I think, to a person, we wonder how he got there. We write a story about him in our heads. And maybe most importantly, we try to imagine another way forward. How and why do we do that? How and why are we capable of imagining something better, writing that story? If our legacy, all of us, is that we want to live in a city of empathy, a city that can live comfortably with multiple truths, and in a community that has the time and capacity to imagine a better way forward for the least of us, the best of us, and everyone in between, then I would argue there is nothing arm's length about a conversation about art. Art is not other. Art is not ornamental. Art is not a trophy for some and a handout for others. It's utterly essential to any conversation about legacy, about community, and about vision. You all have demonstrated that in remarkable ways. I hope here, with a dragon as your witness, that you'll think about how art plays a role in that legacy. I want to thank you so much for your time today. I know I mentioned the dragon. I got a running sheet that said if there were any questions that I should stand here for a moment and take them. So I'm going to. I'm done chatting. But anything you want to know? Anything you want to know about the Alliance Theater? Anything you want to know about the space that you're sitting in? You ask it, I'll answer.
What's he from?
He is from Shrek. Well,
Okay.
he, she.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. Gender.
We on Sunday closed a youth theater production of Shrek. We produce 11 plays a season at the Alliance, and 2 of them are fully staged in this space, works that are specifically created for grade school and middle school kids. And this is one of our stars. Yes.
Question. In your arts area, what is your greatest challenge today? What's the one thing that keeps you up at night? What's the one thing that drives you? Or maybe 2. But
Yeah. Yeah. What is it in my area that keeps me up at night? My biggest challenge, or 2 or 3. We do live in a time when we deal with dissent by just getting louder. And I have a bias about art forms, let it be said. I have a bias about art forms. I have been a theater practitioner for my entire professional life. Theater does not have the benefit of a medium between us and them. There is not a cello, there is not paint, there is not the screen of a film. The actors get 2 hours older by the end, and so does the audience. And that human medium means that things will be said directly that people in the audience may not agree with. And that has always been part and parcel of our art form. It's the part of our art form that I love madly because it introduces me to new ideas. But what's interesting about the age that we live in is that we back away from dissent. We think if we hear something that's not our belief, that perhaps it is wrong. We do not stand on the stage and espouse political views because we want to create a movement. We tell stories because we want to remind, those of us on the stage want to remind ourselves, and we want to remind our audience that we have a shared humanity, even if our views, our beliefs, our backgrounds may be different. And that's a long answer to your question, but what keeps me up at night is the notion that different could be misconstrued as wrong. That keeps me up at night.
How is your audience, how has that changed your audience over time? And does that have something to do with all the technology
It's had a whole lot to do. I mean, attention spans are different than they were when I started making theater, certainly. Our audience has, the Alliance audience has grown a little younger from the time when I started here. We do fantastic quarterly surveys of our audience throughout the Woodruff Arts Center, really immersive surveys of who's spending time here. Our audience has gotten a little younger. Our audience has gotten radically more diverse, and it's the thing I'm most proud of about this theater. And it's why, it's not quite the question you asked, but I'm going to answer it from this angle. It's why the Alliance Theater produces a lot of new work, brand new work. Because if you and I are sitting in a play together, and it's a known play, we're immediately unequal, because maybe you studied it in school and I didn't. Maybe the woman next to me saw it in London last year, and I didn't. And so a hierarchy of sorts, of experience, crops up. Whereas if we're doing a world premiere, absolutely level playing field. Nobody's privileged. We all meet it together. And so Atlanta being Atlanta, and the Alliance being a theater that is committed to having all of Atlanta in our audience and all of Atlanta's stories on our stage, we do a lot of new work.
So you've answered a question I didn't ask, but it's a good question, it's a good answer, which is how you changed your approach since you've been here to productions. And what you're saying is more new, world premiere, special, to keep attention and to broaden the audience.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I would love to tell you that I'm smart enough that I arrived here 13 years ago with that intentional mandate. I didn't. I like new plays. That was my background as a director. What I learned through trial and error was that the audience we wanted was more and more equitably engaged by new work. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
That's it. Susan, I mean, really, you've given us such a gift today because you've really defined legacy in a very different way. And you've defined it in a way that really gets at our hearts. And I certainly appreciate that. And I also appreciate the fact of how what you've been able to create here. And that is a legacy for this community. I mean, it is truly a legacy that we all will appreciate. So thank you. And now I think there are some special tours. True? Yes. Lena Barrett, Weird.
So we have 2 tours, and you'll have on your name tags, you have either a C or a B. So if you have a B on your name tag, you're going to do the backstage tour of both the main stage and the Hurt stage below us, and you're going to go with Scott, the gentleman in the green shirt. And if you have a C on your name tag, you get to see the ins and outs of the costume shop, and you're going to go with, and I forgot, Carol. I knew it was a C as well, with Carol, who's standing right there. So if we want to, is everybody leaving from that side of the stage the best bet?
And if we're not back together again, which we won't be, I think we'll leave right after the tour. Thank you all so much for coming today and being part of this gathering. And there are thank you presents on the tables for each of you. Please take that. And thank you very much for being part of the Community Foundation, and enjoy your tour.